Hello everyone, it's Mr. Nobody, and I'm bringing you a review today. Well, kind of a review. It's actually a top 10 list, except instead of doing top 10, I'm doing top 15, I think. Anyway, what I want to talk about today is my favorite Zelda games. Now, I am a child of the 80s. I was born in 81. And I grew up with the Zelda franchise. It was my favorite video game franchise. I enjoyed a lot of other games, of course. I mean, I was a Nintendo guy. I did get a gaming PC eventually and built a few of my own. Had a lot of fun, especially playing real-time strategy games, Civilization, StarCraft, Warcraft, all those sorts of things. But Zelda is the game franchise that I've played the largest number of games of and have just kept coming back and has really stuck with me. And I've been to one of the Zelda concerts, the 25th anniversary concert. I have a Master Sword. I have a Hylian Shield. And for my daughter's birthday, we even did a Zelda-themed birthday because she has also come to enjoy Zelda. Those are some of the first video games my daughters learned to play. Before they could even play, my daughter liked watching me play them. So I'm a big fan of Zelda. I have really fond memories of being a little kid, like so many others, and playing Link to the Past. I feel like that was maybe one of the first Nintendo games I ever truly beat completely, with the exception of Rampage, when one of my friends and I took one afternoon and we played our way through Rampage on the original Nintendo, and we destroyed every single city in the entire United States, and we had no idea if the game even had an ending. Back then, you didn't know necessarily, does this game ever end or does it just go on forever? Well, it turns out Rampage did have an ending, and you got to the ending and it just said, like, way to go, you've destroyed the country, and like white text on a black background, and then the whole game just restarts, and that's it. We also beat Contra a lot, but that's a lot easier to do, especially if you knew the code to give yourself infinite lives. But playing A Link to the Past was my first real story experience with video game, and that's what really pulled me in. And I like that mix of adventure, exploration, some combat, some puzzle solving, a very classic archetypal sort of story, fantasy world I really like a lot. And I also thought it was a very pretty game. It was a fun world to inhabit. It was always so cute and neat. And I was a kid who I loved my Tolkien, I loved my Star Wars, and Zelda fit right into that with me. So I made my own list this is my personal top 15 Zelda games. And you might say, well, that's not all of the Zelda games. No, it's not, because I haven't played all the Zelda games, and I'm not going to rank ones that I haven't played, and I'm not going to bother playing the ones that I haven't played, so I'm not going to bother talking about the Wand of Gamelon or any of those silly ones. But I'm going to start, instead of building up to number one, I'm going to start right in the middle. So for me, I would actually say the middle of the pack for me is those first two Zelda games. So my number 11 is the very first Zelda game. I did play the very first Zelda game, and I did not do great at it. I was a little too young. But Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, for me, that was the game that really introduced me to the game, and I would put that as my number 10. And for me, those are sort of actually some of the lower ranked ones. And so below that, I'm just going to get these out of the way. The ones that, for me, just didn't do that much to me. I never came back and played them anymore. So, yeah, Zelda, the very first, that's my number 11 game. I enjoyed it. It's a decent game. It's fun. It's simple. Zelda 2. I actually really love the music from Zelda 2. That game, the music from that is still stuck in my mind, along with a sense of dread, because that was a hard game, and I was little, and I was not very good at it. And so when I think of that music, do 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 do, I just automatically get scared and think of Dark Nuts coming along to kill me. And so, as I said, Zelda 1, that's my number 11. Zelda 2, that's my number 10. Now, for the games that for me, I played them, but they just didn't stick with me. Number 12, Spirit Tracks. I thought Spirit Tracks was actually an okay game. It was fun, it was kind of cute. But I'll be honest, I never got to the very end of the game. I just sort of got a certain amount into it. I was fairly far into it, and I was just like, I don't know, this isn't really holding me. So to me, those fall outside the realm of Zelda games that really grabbed me. Another one that also failed to grab me, my number 13, Phantom Hourglass. Same sort of problem. I played my way through it. I never quite finished it because I just didn't find it compelling enough to be pulled along into finishing it. Now, my number 14 is Majora's Mask, and I know some people will be upset by that. Some people think Majora's Mask is the single greatest video game ever played. I hated the mechanic of it. I hated the time mechanic. I hated that sense of pressure and repetition and clock counting down. To me, that just violated the whole open exploratory approach of Zelda. And so I just found Majora's Mask annoying as heck. And I was not a fan. I I thought it was stupid. I thought it was actively unpleasant to play. Um, and then my final ranked one, which maybe it doesn't really deserve this position, Four Swords Adventures. Again, I just found that game annoying. Like, I couldn't even hardly get any distance through that game. I just started playing and I was like, this is dumb. Zelda games tend to center around some particular gameplay mechanic, and often they start with that gameplay mechanic. That's actually what they begin with, and then they build the whole game outward from, here's the thing you're going to do in this one. Here's the sort of hook. And I just did not enjoy the Four Swords Adventures hook. It did not work for me. Same with Majora's Mask. Okay, so I'm going to work my way upward, as I said, starting from Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 down at that number 11, number 10 zone. So, number 9, Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening is a fun game. I actually have not played the remake of it. I would probably like that even more. It looks really cute, looks really fun. It's got clever dungeon design. To me, it just seems like it's just like a nice mobile version of a Zelda game. It's actually fairly solid. It doesn't look incredible. It's got I didn't find it had quite the same charm as some of the more, main console video games, but it still was a very good sort of mobile version of it. And so for that, I will give it some credit and put it in number 9. Moving up to number 8. Now, in my opinion, from this point on, all these games are really good. Like, I mean, obviously, Zelda and Zelda 2, those are classics. And everything above that, I actually think is a very good game. My number 8 is Skyward Sword. I actually really enjoyed Skyward Sword at the time. I thought it was a fun difference. I did have the motion tracking version of it, and it was fun. It had a very tactile feel to it. I enjoyed swinging my sword around. I enjoyed having it track me. The fully orchestrated score, that was nice. I thought some of the bosses were really cool. There's some really fun mechanics in it with like the time jumps. And I actually thought the dungeons were really interesting, like beautiful designs. They had a real big sense of place. They were really epic in scope. They had a wonderful design. They had a wonderful richness to them. And that's one of the things I'll really say about Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword had a real style to it. It also had some really annoying things like collecting stuff and taking it and having it be worked on, and all of that was sort of annoying. And the whole sky mechanic and parachuting down and then being in this very limited area, like, it was interesting. It was neat. I liked being up in the clouds and stuff, but it was also, there's less in the sky to do than I would have liked, and when you were on the ground, you did feel kind of confined. Nevertheless, it was a game that had some really high highs in it, had some really incredible bosses, and it had some really neat locations that I genuinely enjoyed a lot. So I do have to give credit to Skyward Sword. It's a good game. So moving on to number 7, I'm actually going to say Minish Cap. Minish Cap, which was not developed by Nintendo, and I think it was a Game Boy Color game. I didn't play this game until much later. I got it on my 3DS, and I played it, and I was just like, this is a really fun game. You know, the whole shrinking and getting big mechanic, it's neat. It's a fun mechanic. As I said, there's some mechanics that I have not enjoyed in Zelda games. The whole shrunken micro world mechanic and the way it can open up navigational opportunities, and all of a sudden you're fighting a boss that's just a normal minor monster, but when you're tiny, it's gigantic. I thought that was so cute and so fun. And I really liked this idea of a hidden world. I was a kid who really liked to get down on and crouch and look at the bugs and picture myself in this tiny world of theirs. And so I thought Minish Cap did a great job of that. And it actually ended up being a far more epic game than I expected, because it just kept expanding. When I first look at it, you're like, there's not that much to this game. I mean, I feel like I could run across the entire world in like a matter of seconds. But you find out, ooh, there's enormous amounts of detail packed into it. And there's places you never imagined you were going to get to access, like the sky. And so I like that. And that gave it that same sense of depth and discovery that you really want from a Zelda game, to sort of see the world opening up in front of you in new and surprising ways, and finding all sorts of secrets. And it had some really, really fun items too. And again, neat art style, neat locations. I really enjoy the style of the Minish Cap. I actually think it's a very good Zelda game. It belongs up high up. And you can tell that because my number 6, right above it, I'm going to say Ocarina of Time. Some people will probably disagree with that. Some people say Ocarina of Time should be at the top. Maybe that it has to do with what you personally like or when you were born. I remember Ocarina of Time when I got my Nintendo 64 for that Christmas, and that was one of the games I got with it. That was one of the main games I wanted to get. At least I think it was one of the first ones I got. I think that first day I remember playing Shadows of the Empire and Mario, of course, and I had a ton of fun with both of those. And then Ocarina of Time, and I took the trouble to complete Ocarina of Time. So I loved that game. It was great. It's a wonderful game. It's really fun. It's got a lot of style to it. I also have the 3DS remake of it, which is a really nice way to access it. I actually think it's great as a mobile game like that. And the updated art works really well. It's fun. The dungeons are really fun. There's some that I particularly loved. I always loved the whole Gerudo area. I love the music. I love the experience of crossing the desert. I love that you solve that dungeon partly in the past and partly in the future. Things like that are neat, and there's some real creepy locations in it too. Time travel was a fun mechanic. It was neat, and it did go places that were new. So I mean, obviously, Ocarina of Time's a great game. I don't have anything against Ocarina of Time. I just happen to like some other games more. I would rather, if I said, well, what am I going to replay? What do I want to jump into? I don't find Ocarina of Time as good of a game to just like, oh, I'm going to go back and jump back into it. Like, it's fine if you want to do the whole game through again, but it's not great to just pop back into. But my number 5, Wind Waker. At the time it came out, it's funny because there was a lot of negative press at the time. For those of you who remember, who are around, a lot of people were critical. They were like, oh, we thought we were going to get this hyper-realistic Zelda. Instead, we got this cutesy cartoony one. And I looked at it and I was just like, well, this is in keeping with things like Link to the Past. And actually, the visual style is fantastic. I'm also someone who's enjoyed animation, and I thought it was so clever how like, the funny thing about Wind Waker is it's one of the games that holds up amazingly well. It actually ended up giving birth to its own unique Zelda art style that get reused again and again and again in other games. And that just proves, like, if other games look at what you're doing and say, wow, that's so good, we're going to imitate that, you've clearly done something fantastic. It was a really fun game. Yeah, there was a lot of wandering around in the ocean, and I appreciate now that you have things like the fast sail. And, maybe there's not as many big islands as you might wish, but it was a really neat game. I especially loved all the Forbidden Fortress parts, the Tower of the Gods when you finally go down to see Hyrule. That was wonderful. It was a real experience. It had a really strong plot, and I think having that animated style actually really helped carry the plot more strongly. It made the characters very expressive and distinctive, and I still remember thinking, looking at like the moblins and things, just thinking they look incredible. It looks like a cartoon come to life. It looks like the drawings from the game manual of the earlier games, but of course the in-game sprites looked just vaguely suggestive of those. But then in the Wind Waker, it's like, oh, they look like that, and they have all that personality and really fun game. I love how, as I said, how expressive it is. It's a world that I think pulls you into it. It's got really fun music too. I thought the music was great. The changes in the weather out on the ocean. It's just a lot of fun. And it is a game you can just pop into it. I've seen my daughters just pop in and replay the opening sequence on Outset Island again and again and again, or just sail off to an island and have a little adventure. So I think Wind Waker is actually really special that way. So that's why it's my number 5. Moving to my number 4 is Breath of the Wild. I put a lot of time into Breath of the Wild. I completed that game, except for I don't know that I bothered with all the Koroks. I didn't see that as that seemed to me seem more like a busy task, but I made sure to do everything else, all the monster hunting medals and everything else, and I completed it. And then my daughter came through and deleted my file by accident permanently and unrecoverably, which made me kind of go through and do it again, which was fun. And I would say Breath of the Wild is very replayable. Partly it is a game that, like my daughters, they'll just jump into the file and just go have a little adventure. And it is a great game that way. It's got a lot of replayability. Does have that wonderful sense of exploration. For me, the funnest part of Breath of the Wild in some ways is starting over, starting at the beginning and having to... And I really actually enjoy creating a new save file and saying, okay, how am I going to do it this time? Which direction am I going to go? Which way am I going to set out? Which approach am I going to take? Which of the divine beasts am I going to go after first? How is that going to change my journey? What items am I going to go for first? And that's part of the fun. And it's such a big game. Everyone knows that's a wonderful game. So it does really capture the exploration. It does really capture that replayability. For me, Breath of the Wild would rank higher if it weren't for that it has two, to me, massive deficits compared to other Zelda games. Well, I guess it's 3, really. And they're things that other Zelda games are very good at. The things that Breath of the Wild does well, it does spectacularly well. But there are 3 things that it just doesn't really do, and that are generally that Zelda's very strong on. One of those is music. I mean, Breath of the Wild has got like the weakest music of any Zelda game I played. It's almost non-existent. I love ambient sounds, but man, I am humming those old Zelda songs from the 80s and the 90s still today. I'm using them as the ringtone on my phone. My daughters will do, guess that tune, and they'll sing the songs from A Link to the Past, which they haven't even played through, but they've seen me play it, they've heard those songs, and they just stick in their head. They're wonderful songs. And Breath of the Wild is just, in my opinion, doesn't even have a soundtrack. Like, there's a little music here and there. There's some music in the castle, but it's really more just what I would call all ambient sound and ambient music. It's not real music, and that's disappointing for me. And even the music it does have is generic. It's ambient. It doesn't have a real tune or character to it. So music, big mark down for me. Second thing, story. I mean, obviously, it's a much more unstructured game. You create your own story yourself. Um, and what story there is that is structured is really weak and shallow, and the characters are bland and they're poorly performed. I especially dislike the person voicing Zelda. Like, it's one of the worst voice performances I have ever heard in a video game, in my opinion, is Zelda from Breath of the Wild. I absolutely hate her performance. So I'm sorry to the actress, but yeah, I just did not like that at all. And just in general, I thought the script writing for the scripted bits were shallow, weak, hackneyed. I mean, they were dumb. They just weren't good. And then the third thing is dungeons. Again, this is a thing where it's like, well, you've got these four divine beasts, and you've got all these shrines, and they're really neat. They're really neat for what they are. It's doing something different. And what it is doing, it's doing really well. But it's not doing Zelda dungeons, these unique themed places that have this real character to them and a sort of story to them and unique bosses to them and unique enemies to them that make you feel like you're traveling to these different lands and have these very different atmospheres. That's part of what I personally love about Zelda, and Breath of the Wild just doesn't have that. The only dungeon you could really say it has is Hyrule Castle. There's a little fun when you do like the Yiga hideout, but that's so small. It's neat. It's really neat. And you have this idea of like you go places and it gives you the idea of some of that experience, but it's not cohesive, there's not actually something there. It's all unstructured. So I don't know. It gives you some of that experience. It's the wild. It doesn't have the dungeon. I would just say I still placed it very high. I still placed it at number 4, but these things are such distinctive Zelda features. I would love it if there had just been, but then I understand if they didn't have time for it, all of this great external world, but also a few decent dungeons. Instead, the divine beasts all look and play about the same. All of the major bosses look and play about the same. All of the shrines look and play about the same. There's an enormous amount of sameness in the dungeon experience, and so for me, that's the only thing that causes me to not place it much higher up there. Maybe in the sequel they'll change it. If they get into the sequel and you start expanding things and they do add a dungeon with more distinct enemies and more distinct places that have more of that sense of story to them, because the shrines are great. They're challenges. They're fun challenges. But they don't really have any visual or narrative arc to them like the other dungeons manage to have. They don't have that sense of place. So on to number 3. My number 3, for a long time, this would have been my number 1, but over time, things change. My number 3 is Link to the Past. Link to the Past is the one that I grew up on. I have beaten it so many times. I don't even know how many times I've beaten it. That is one of the most, just jump in, play the whole game through, It's only going to take you a few hours. It's a fun game. It's fun gameplay. It's really, there's something about even just the actual physical act of playing it. It's very elegant once you know what you're doing. It's just a joy to play. It's fun to operate. It gives you that tactile pleasure that a lot of those early Nintendo games really did, like Mario, that just, they were fun in a very tactile way. You enjoyed the action of playing them. And I always thought Link to the Past, for how early it comes in the video game world. It's got a wonderful story, wonderful complexity, so much hidden stuff and storylines you can chase in depth, and characters if you want to dig down into it. And you want to find everything, you want to explore every little corner, you want to see every little story, and it all ties it all together and wraps it up, and you get this wonderful outro at the end, which was totally a surprise. I was so surprised to see this huge wrapping up of all the story, and then Link returning the Master Sword and walking away. And to me, it felt so dramatic, like I'd really experienced a story that I was part of. And so for me, Link to the Past, that is it is the definitive Zelda game. And with these last three, I would say they're all neck and neck. Where I put them sort of depends on my mood. Link to the Past is the definitive Zelda game. It is the one that really sets the tone and sets the structure and defines what Zelda is for the rest of time. And it deserves that. It's great. It's so much fun, super replayable. You should definitely have some version of it. I have multiple versions of it. I've got it on many different ways that I could play it. And it's just great. And the music is fantastic. The dungeons, I love the dungeons in Link to the Past. They're so much fun. And it's always fun to get, now I'm playing this one, which is my favorite. But, actually, I really like this one. Maybe this one's my favorite. This one's annoying. But actually, now that I'm playing it, I'm really enjoying it. This is neat. And each one has such a distinctive style. And you feel like each dungeon is such a unique experience. The way that they integrated the style and the items really makes you feel like every dungeon is this whole very special experience and a special part of the story. And you can choose in what order you want to tackle various things. And it has that open exploratory nature to it too. So like I said, if in a certain time I might pick it as my number one, but right now I'm feeling it's about number 3. And my number 2, which stands on its shoulders, is Link Between Worlds. And you might say, Link Between Worlds, that's a 3DS game, and it's just using the same world as Link to the Past. Now, as a work of video game art, yes, it's not accomplishing as much, but it is the example in so many ways of a perfect follow-up, because it takes the world, and it takes the ideas, and even brings back things that are similar, and just evolves them in whole new ways. It does the light world, dark world sort of thing again, but in a slightly different way. A fun way, a neat way. The two-dimensional bits of it are just a whole lot of fun. I think Link Between Worlds might be the most replayable Zelda game, and that's why I placed it so high. This is a game that it's so easy to come back to. You just keep coming back to it, because it's always easy at any moment for any length of time to jump into that game and just have fun. And it's such a cute world. I love that you're back in the world of A Link to the Past. I love that you're returning to so many of these locations and fighting these same fun enemies. I love that it has the same diversity of locations and diversity of dungeons. So it does all the things Link to the Past was doing, and it just does an updated, fun twist version of them. So it kind of has... and you might want to knock it a little bit for originality, but it adds to Link to the Past. And I truly think it is the most replayable Zelda game. If you haven't played it, you definitely should. It's just a ton of fun. It's always fun. It has that same very tactile, fun to play, controls like a dream. You really feel like, I'm having fun. I'm having fun with the challenges. I can tackle this however I want to tackle it. The only thing that, again, it tries to mix things up by not tying the items to a specific dungeon and letting you kind of get them in any order, mostly, and being able to rent them and buy them. And that is nice. I'm actually a little like meh on that. I would have been fine having the items tied to the dungeons. I do feel sometimes like that I don't know, it actually interferes with my sense of progression rather than improving it. I'm a little skeptical about that whole thing, but that's not a big deal. And then my number 1 is actually Twilight Princess. So for me, Twilight Princess is again, it's the evolution of Link to the Past. It's saying, okay, we had Link to the Past, and we did Ocarina of Time. We took it into 3D. And then what's the next evolution of a classic Zelda game? And those three are probably more similar to each other than any of the others in some ways. And I think that's a clear progression. And Twilight Princess is just like, it's doing the same things that Ocarina of Time and Link to the Past were doing. It's just like the fully developed version of it. I like that version of Link. I like that world. I like the style. There's a ton of fantastic dungeons in it. It's got the biggest epic final fight and showdown that presents a real challenge and many stages. It's got a big complex world, tons of secrets, fun, zany characters, neat design. Like, it's got all the strengths of, in my opinion, sort of all the other games, and it's got a neat mechanic. The wolf mechanic was neat. The Twilight mechanic was cool. I thought the story was really strong. I thought that was probably the strongest story, and Midna is by far the most likable companion, like by a wide margin. I really like Midna. Midna was great. She was a great character. I remember when the mirror of Twilight gets cracked at the end, my daughter was watching. She didn't know what was going to happen, and she was just shocked, and she cried afterwards. So it was, it actually has a fun story. It's got a neat Zelda in it. It's got a good sub-minor villain in Zant. I like its sense of humor. There's, like with the sad clown guy, my daughters get a big kick out of the monkeys, especially the big monkey who likes to slap his butt. It's got great atmosphere. The places have a wonderful atmosphere, and the music in Twilight Princess is great. It's very cinematic. It's like playing through a Zelda movie. And that's what I like about it. It's like I said, it's sort of this sort of evolution, like this is the complete. Now, we haven't exactly had a follow-up to that, and I feel like it's because, well, in the progression of those sort of classic Zelda games that we went through, Twilight Princess already kind of gave us this ultimate version of it. And, maybe they'll choose to go more that direction with the Breath of the Wild sequel, and it'll take more inspiration from Twilight Princess and be more plot heavy, character heavy, story heavy. That's always possible. Lots of variety heavy. I guess we'll see. But for me, Twilight Princess is just, it's a cool game. I really like it. I know some people aren't as into it, or it can be more of a black sheep. I actually think it's fantastic. It is, I think at the moment, my favorite Zelda game. So that's all for today. We'll see you next time.